Hello everyone, and welcome to a video. It's David here. I'm just going to do a bit of a long form video today. I hope the audio holds up and that the visuals are relatively engaging, but know that this is going to be a slightly longer rambling video. I'm going to talk about a bunch of stuff as I go along, and really I see these videos as an opportunity for you to, crack out your paints and get your brush ready and get on with some painting while you listen in. So don't feel like you have to stare at the screen. It's not, promise you, it's not that engaging. Although I will try to at least add some stuff in terms of visual interest as we go along. So it's now the middle of August almost. It's Catherine's birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday, Catherine, my lovely wife. And I'm down here in the basement. It is absolutely red as outside. It's like it must be about 25 degrees Celsius, say about 80 Fahrenheit, something around there. And this house, well, where I live, houses don't have air conditioning, so it's not that it's unbearably hot. It's actually relatively pleasant when you're outside, but being inside upstairs is not great. Downstairs, on the other hand, is fantastic. It's nice and cool down here because the temperature remains relatively stable. So I am down here, and I have my little buddies with me as well, which I will quickly show you. Buddy number one, who is lying over there, and she's thanking her lucky stars that she's not outside right now. They've been really feeling the heat. They don't get to cool themselves off. And buddy number two over there, old Hector, he's having a good old snooze, and they are most pleased to be indoors. So I've got a bunch of stuff to show you. I thought I'd start with what I'm going to call, I guess, acquisitions, because they're not really purchases. Well, not all of them are purchases, but a little bit of everything this month. I've done a fair bit of travelling for work, but luckily the last couple of weeks I've been at home, and I've made the most of that. So I'll save the finished stuff until the end, but let's get cracking with showing off some of the bits and bobs that I picked up. So I'll just shove this to one side. First off, I picked up some unarmored phalangite command. These are Crusader figures. Long-suffering viewers will know that I am rather partial to some Crusader figures, and I actually sized these up against the Foundry Macedonian range, and they're actually a pretty decent fit. They're a little bit smaller, but not big enough to really notice. So you get your commander type here. Oh, that's the thing. So I don't have a ton of command figures for my Macedonian phalanx figures, which I got from Foundry a very long time ago. So I thought, you can kind of never have enough command figures. They're a nice way to spice things up for your command bases, or alternatively for your sort of brigade commanders, generals, that type of thing. So what this guy here, this is the sword-wielding chap getting ready to lead his men into action. Then you get a standard, just standing fella, and then you get a standard bearer, which is really cool. I love this this little sort of flaggy thing. And of course a musician. I think I'm short a shield. I think you're supposed to get 3 shields in the pack, but I only got 2. It's not the end of the world. I can just source one from somewhere else. I'm sure I'll find something appropriate. Anyway, so that's the command pack I got. Now I picked this up on a lark. I was down in Everett or something like that for work, down in Seattle. There's a really great shop there. I'll give it another plug. It's called Games Plus in Lake Stevens. The owner is absolutely lovely guy. Him and his wife, fantastic. Hugh is the guy's name, Hugh Singh, absolutely top man. It is worth stopping by and having a rummage to see what he has. Prices are great. Oh, and we got old Hector there moving around. He's gone to the center of the floor to cool down. So yeah, as I said, Hugh is a great guy. He's got loads of weird and wacky stuff in his shop, like stuff that's really old and obscure alongside the latest and greatest. So he's always very friendly, has a little chat. Definitely, if you're in that area, make the trip. You will not be disappointed. There's something there for everyone. So I picked this up. I always make a point, if I'm driving by or if I'm in an area, to buy something from the local gaming store, right? So let me get on to the next thing. All right. Okay. So next thing, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma again for work, and I stopped by Top Deck Games. I had an evening where I'd finished work, and I thought, you know what, I could go back to the hotel and be miserable, or I can go check out the gaming stores. And I drove around town, and there were a few stores that came up, and you know, I stopped at one of them and it was okay. Didn't have much in terms of miniatures gaming. And then I stopped at Top Deck Games. The owner, whose name escapes me right now, but he was an absolutely lovely bloke. We had a chat. He wasn't pushy at all. He just showed me around the store, explained stuff, and there was something in the middle of the store that got me. So if you look at this pack that I bought, it says Dylan on it, Dylan W by the looks of it, $15. And I bought this this Warhammer Fantasy Skink Priest. Now you might wonder, ooh, what are you doing with that? I actually have a small collection of Lizardmen figures, and what I really want to use them for is a kind of Venusian science fiction game. So you know how people do red coats on Mars? I'd like to do red coats on Venus. So the idea is that using that 19th century idea that Venus is this hot jungle planet with dinosaurs, that kind of thing, very kind of pulpy sci-fi idea. And so I picked this up on a whim, and I thought, you know, I have this long-term project in my mind that I'd love to do someday. Having a character figure, a sort of shaman type figure, would be pretty cool. So I picked this up. But back to the label, it says Dylan W on it, you can see there. And the way it works is this chap has a like a bring and buy table in the middle of his store, and his local patrons that come there, guys who come to the club or store or whatever, if they have stuff they want to sell, they can put it on the table with a price tag and their name on it, and if it gets sold, there's like a referencing system, so the owner knows who's got what and at what prices, so it's unlikely that people are going to swap labels and that kind of thing, but you get the idea. Anyway, so say he had, say like Dylan here had this thing that he wanted to get rid of. He chooses the price he wants for it. So originally it was priced at $20. I can see the old price tag underneath it. It obviously wasn't shifting, so Dylan decides to drop it to 15. I walk in and I buy it. Now what then happens is he gets $15 of store credit. So I pay cash money for it, and he gets $15 of store credit. The owner says he does it as a sort of community thing. Guys always have stuff they want to get rid of, and it just makes it a lot easier because people don't have to arrange pickups and stuff, right? And they're going to spend the money at his store anyway. But I guess it's a nice thing to do in the community, and I suppose it keeps the money flowing through his business. So I picked this up. It was very good. I thought it was a very good price. And again, it's all about supporting the local businesses. Hector, do you mind? He's being rather obnoxious today. But now she's awake, and he has decided to also. He's decided to relocate. Have you decided it's just time to wake up? Huh? There we go. That's more like it. There we go. See, life is so hard when you don't have to work for a living. Alright, so back to my story about Tulsa. So anyway, I'm in Tulsa, having a great time. Popped by the shop, buy that, and then I thought, you know, spend a couple of bucks. And I also picked up this Warlord Games box of 28mm former Conquest miniatures, actually, which I always rather fancied. So these are for the French and Indian War. And again, a bit of a whim. Price was right, you know. I've never bought any Conquest figures before, but I do recall back when they were Conquest miniatures, they were quite nice, or at least so I thought. So I picked them up. I can't remember what I paid for them, but I remember it was well below what I would have paid had I bought them from Warlord Direct. And of course, the added benefit is, you know, you are supporting a local business. I've inspected them. The casting is very good, I will say that. They are cleanly cast. There's not a lot of flash on them. It looks like minimal cleanup. These are supposed to be Rogers Rangers. Now, I won't review these now per se, but one thing I did find curious about them is if you look at the back of the box, you get a better sense of what's going on here, what's cutting, as we say in South Africa. And some nice looking figures. One thing that is slightly bizarre is, to my mind at least, Rogers Rangers wore a lot of like beret or like Scottish bonnet type things, you know, so sort of think like a beret with a bobble on top, right? I thought that was their kind of quintessential headgear, And if you look at a lot of other Rangers, that's what the Meg Rogers Rangers looks like. This is more the kind of light infantry cap with a flipped up peak. For the most part, not a single one of them has the Scotch bonnet, but there you go. So very weird. Yeah, Rogers Rangers, interesting bloke. Cool story actually about Rogers Rangers as a unit. Israel Putnam, who would later be famous during the American War of Independence as Old Put, actually fought in the French and Indian War with Rogers Rangers. So you can see how the kind of, obviously the French and Indian War wasn't an awfully long time before the Revolution, but still you can see how the two connect, you know, even within that short period of time. Again, not a review for them per se, just more of a kind of, I got him, and at some point I will probably paint him. Not a priority though. French and Indian Wars, I'll probably do them more as a skirmish game. I'm thinking your muskets and tomahawks type thing, or your sharp practice. And I know that I've said a lot of things about sharp practice in the past, but I do think the French and Indian War is a very appropriate way to play the game, because again, you're playing with very small armies. The forces were by their very nature very small. A lot of the conflict was skirmish scale in real terms. In other words, it's not Waterloo with 6 blokes and calling that a battalion, right? And the other thing as well is that the forces are relatively generic, so you don't end up in that ridiculous situation where you have the, you know, 8 grenadiers, 8 fusiliers, a howitzer, and, you know, 6 cavalrymen who just happen to be bimbling through the woods together and stumble across, oh, wouldn't you know it, a French force of very similar composition. It just, that this would be basically infantry on infantry, highly roleplay driven type game in my mind. So anyway, picked that up, very happy with it. Like I said, casting quality looks absolutely sublime, can't really complain. So those were the 2 purchases, or rather those were the 3 purchases for the month, until, I say the month, it was probably back in the last month, until a surprise purchase happened. So what I'll do now is I'm going to take you for a little walk. Hold on to your hats, things are going to get shaking up in here. Sorry Hector, we'll try not to disturb you, young man. Alright, so here is something I want to show you. So if we have a look here, you will see piles and piles of figures. Absolute honking piles of them. These are all ancient Iberians. These are Spanish, right? So you'll remember a few months back I was popping by again, Lake Stevens, Games Plus, stopped by Hugh's store, and I picked up a bunch of packs at a really good price. He did me a bit of a deal. So I picked up some old Renegade stuff, amongst which was some Spanish. I got some Numidians and all sorts. So anyway, got piles and piles of figures, you know, channeling my inner Ralph Astley and just basically gobbling them up because they're at a great price. I know I will want them at some point, and I may as well get them now. And then, I think it was last week or the week before last, I was down in Lake Stevens. This was not related to the other purchase I showed you. This was after that fact. I was down in Everett for work, and on the way home, it was rush hour traffic, and it was absolutely miserable. And I thought, you know what? Rather than trying to grizz my way through the traffic up north, back up I-5 towards the border, what I would do instead is simply just wait out the traffic. Anyway, so I stopped by Lake Stevens to Hugh's store, and I hear that he's there, and I pop around, and at this point I'm wandering around the store. You know, I've got a pack in my hands. I think it was Artisan Design Landsknecht figures, the Doppelsoldner, you know, the ones with the big swords, and I thought, oh, I'll pick a pack up of those. You never know when you need them, type thing. They'd be useful in some way, I'm sure. You know, these are the lies we tell ourselves. Anyway, so as I'm going about the store, I see Hugh, he sees me, we say hi. It's, you know, been a while, I haven't seen him in a few months, because it's just been one of those ones. Every time I pop round, he hasn't been in, and I'll get chatting to him, and he's at his desk as usual, where he paints. He just prolifically paints, this guy. He just absolutely knocks him out, these massive armies. And he says to me, he says, oh, you know, because he knows I'm interested in historical stuff more than the fantasy and all that stuff. He says, oh, if you're interested, I've got a Spanish army for sale. I said, oh, really? And he says, yeah. And he had this little sleevey thing, and it was full with blister packs, right? And he went, you can have that for $140, right, as a deal. And I was like, no way. So I said, oh, let me have a quick look then. So I count through there, and there was something like 22 blister packs in there. 22 blister packs. and I mean there was everything. There was Scutari, there were Ketrati, there were cavalry, generals, a little bit of everything really. Like basically the other half of the Spanish figures I hadn't bought from him. And he said, yeah, you know, he was just trying to get rid of them. He didn't really, they weren't in his system properly because he doesn't really stock Crusader miniatures. They were sort of an estate purchase, blah, blah, blah. And he just wanted to get rid of them to create some space. As I mentioned earlier, the store's a bit of a warren, which I love, right? It's a great place to rummage, but, you know, I guess from his perspective, it's kind of a nightmare. So he was like, $140 and it's yours. And I was like, oh, that's a great deal. Needless to say, I'm on the phone with Catherine, begging and pleading. Honey, this is the deal of the century. Honey, this is such a great deal. It just doesn't get any better than this, which it doesn't, of course. You know, it was a steal. You know, you think about it, it's 20 odd packs for 140, dollars. It's $7 a pack. That's a fantastic deal, even with the taxes added on. It's still a great price. So Catherine, needless to say, obviously said yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this part. But she was like, yeah, go for it. It's a good deal. You basically can't beat that price, no matter which way you slice it. So I came home with just arms full of figures. Now, what I've done here is I've started deblistering them and combining them all together just to save space, to condense it all down. And at some point, I will have to count up what I have here and then start divvying it into basically the elements that I'm going to paint. This is not a priority, of course. This is part of the nurturing of Lead Mountain, with a view to putting together the plan in the end. But I'll just show you here quickly. So, you know, you can see there's a couple of them that are based. Those are from a few months ago. I had this idea, you know, as I do with most things, I like to sort of churn my way through bits and pieces, as and when the mood takes me. So most of the collection is Crusader. There's like one pack of Spanish which are Renegade figures, which are now out of production. Really nice figures, actually. These are the ones just on the side here. They're a slightly chunkier looking figure, but I really do like Renegade. But yeah, I mean, you know, when you see a great deal like that, you've got to take it. You can't not do it, you know, at that steal. So I figured I might as well treat myself. I guess our anniversary is coming up, so we can call it that, shall we? Anyway, so I'm going to carry you back now. Again, let's just have a quick look at our sleeping beauties over here. Look at that life. What a life. They are loving it in here because it's nice and cool, you see, so they're not melting for the minute, which is great. Alright, so let me just get you back in here. Oh, you may notice I've got this screen here. Let me just see if I can quickly show you. There we go. I've got this big old screen. The light's not helping. Let me step back a bit. So we've got the screen there, and then my exhaust fan, or exhaust hose rather, that goes to the window. And then I've got the spray booth set up. Haven't used it yet. It's one of those things where I mean to use it, and then I'm just, you know, I'm too busy painting with a brush, to be honest. Getting things done, partially done things done. So I've kind of started piling things that I plan to spray paint in there, not the painted figures, of course, which I'll show you at the end. But yeah, anyway, so I've got that all set up, and then I keep telling myself, right, okay, I'll sit down and I'll do some spray painting. But of course, as I said, being too busy kind of finishing stuff off to really waste my time with spray painting now. But the screen here, what that is I decided a couple of months ago I got rid of the PC. There was a laptop set up here and everything. It took up an awful lot of space, and there was a screen for it to plug into and all that jazz. There was a lot of room taken up on the desk. Anyway, I've replaced that with a little tiny computer. It's like a thin client. It's about this big. It lives underneath the desk there, it goes to sleep, and it runs Chrome OS, which is Google's sort of persistent OS, I guess, but it's entirely cloud-based, so you know, everything basically runs in a web browser, which is perfect for down here, right? I don't need it to play games or anything. That's for upstairs. So I just use it to kind of watch videos, also kind of my ebooks. I can pull them up, my Kindle books, up on the big screen for painting reference. You know, I've got a keyboard here. It's kind of tucked under the desk, and a mouse, so I can kind of crack on and do some mild web browsing when I'm down here. But I'm not looking for something too intrusive, and it doesn't have to be high performance either. So it's a nice way for me to, you know, if I'm sitting here and I'm doing something and I think, oh, I'd really like to see a picture of this, I can just quickly Google it. or check my Google Drive and see if I have the necessary, what's the word I'm looking for, like resource there. Alright, so let's get on to some other acquisitions. And again, I use the word acquisitions very purposefully here and intentionally, and now it is about acquisition time. So a while back, one of the founding members of the White Rock Gamers here in Canada, well, I say here in Canada, I'm in America obviously, but just across the border in Canada, Rick Stevens, who was a powerhouse of the local gaming community, passed away. And of course, as part of that, there's this miserable moment where everybody realizes that we're all mortal and someday we'll die and our toy soldiers will have to go somewhere. And so Rick's, from what I gather, anyway, I don't know Rick very well, I will say that, I kind of only knew him towards the end of his life, and he was always very generous to me. I never forget, I think I may have mentioned him a few videos ago about some books that he gave me, and he gave me some paints, just stuff that he had spare, and he said, look, you might as well go to a good home, I'm never going to use it again. And he just palmed that off on me, and I very much appreciated it. Palmed off is probably not the right word, but if you know what I mean, he gave it to me, right? So anyway, I was very thrilled to receive the bits and pieces from him when he was alive. And then with his passing, there's been this moment where the club members have been going through his wargaming stuff to figure out what to do with it. And I know that's something that a lot of wargamers discuss, what happens to your collection when you go. And in Rick's case, I suppose he's lucky in that it doesn't just get all thrown on a tip, right? It's more or less all been rehomed from what I can gather. And, it's excellent. It's gone to his club members. It's stayed in the club for the most part, I'm sure. I'm sure there'll be some elements that end up going outside of the club, but will nevertheless, I'm sure, go to worthy, inheritors. So anyway, a couple of weeks ago, months ago at this point, I turned up at the club, and one of the lads at the club hands me this Tupperware box here, this one, with a bunch of figures in it. He says, oh, you can have these if you like. And it's Empress miniatures, which I absolutely love. Zulu figures, which I guess you could use for matabele as well if you really wanted to, but they have the sort of monkey tail loincloths, which is more of a Zulu thing. But yeah, so a bunch of these packs, and they are quite exquisite. I really like Empress figures. They are beautifully proportioned. They're a slightly finer figure than most. They mix quite well with Perry. I'm not much of a Zulu war guy myself, but I will say that, of course, amongst my interests in terms of colonial wargaming is South Africa, which is where I'm from, and more in my mind towards the Boer wars, and the various conflicts there. But there's, so the Swazis wouldn't look too amiss in this Zulu regalia. They are, after all, related. The Swazi royal family and the Zulu royal family are, basically, linked. And in terms of dress and all that stuff, the Swazis do look very similar to the Zulus. And there were obviously wars there. The Swazis were often allied with the Boers. The Boers fought the Zulus fought the British, everybody fought the British, the usual thing. So these packs will definitely be used. I'll probably use them as Swazis more than I use them as Zulus, but you never know. So I picked them up. I have some matabele as well that I got from North Star many years ago. I've painted those up already. They're just a couple of musketmen, but again, you can use those without too much imagination. It's just Zulu skirmishy musket types, the old brown base muskets, trade muskets, right? So those are the Zulu stuff, and then amongst it as well, an absolute treasure trove here, modest but very, very lovely. These are Aventine figures. These are the horse, like they're not horse lords, but like step horsemen range, right? With the break waist, I think that's the term. Figures, so you can sort of put them together. They're sort of you have to assemble these, but I'm not sure exactly which codes they relate to. But they are quite nice actually. And then this looks like some heads here. These look to me like Italian, like Perry Italian heads, I think, if you were doing conversions or whatever. So a little bit of everything in here. But the Aventine figures look quite lovely, to be honest. The horses look really nice, really well sculpted. I've never seen Aventine figures in the flesh before, so this is quite nice. You can never go wrong with horse archers. Kind of everyone uses them. They cover a vast period of time. I have some Pecheneg or Patzinak horse archers. I've got some Scythians. they can do duty in pretty much anybody's forces. So yeah, they will be a welcome addition to the collection. Again, you know, there's part of me that when you paint these figures and you know that the provenance of them is that they've come to you from somebody who has been an absolute giant in the wargaming community, you feel like you need to do them honor, I guess is maybe the right word, when you paint them. So that's something that I'll definitely keep in mind as I'm painting the figures. You know, front and center of my mind will be the fact that they aren't just any figures; they are Rick's figures. So you know, it is. We've been playing a lot of Renaissance games recently, playtesting the latest rule set for Control to Catastrophe, which I haven't talked about on the channel yet, and I will. I must make a video about that. It'll be quite a long, rambly one, kind of like this. But we've been using Rick's figures a lot recently to play some games. You know, Swedes against you know, Poles, and I think last week we played Italians against French in the Italian Wars. You know, that kind of thing. So we've had a lot of, you know, every time his figures come out, it's a nice treat, and you get to kind of be transported back in time. The man was prolific when it came to painting. He would just pump out armies, you know, and then sell them for way less than they were truly worth in terms of the amount of labor and love that went into them. And then he would just buy he would use that to finance the next army, and he'd paint that and get that done, and the same thing would just keep happening. So, yeah. You know, I think the greatest legacy you can have as a wargamer within a community is to be respected by everybody and remembered. Okay, so I know normally I show stuff off that's on the table. I don't really need to do that here. There's the usual suspects on the table. You know, a bit of Crimean stuff, some World War II stuff, some 10mm Franco-Prussian War stuff. I've decided I think I'm just going to show that to you when it's done. There's sort of no point showing you half-finished things. What I will do, though, I haven't based them yet, but I have finished these two figures. And these are the Italian Bersaglieri. They're actually originally for the Boxer Rebellion, but I'm going to use these for Adwa, so the Ethiopia, 1896, I believe. And I painted these up kind of on the side while I was doing everything else, and I've tried a few different things with them. Now, you'll notice these dowels, right? And oh, I forgot to tell you, so on my birthday in June, I absolutely buggered up my left thumb, like really badly. You might be able to see, hang on a second, there's a scar there, see that? A dog tooth went in there. My dogs were fighting. I decided to be a dumbass and get my hands in between them. Anyway, and so there's a fragment of bone floating inside my thumb now, which is disconnected from the actual thumb itself. It's no way painful, but the doctor thinks that my dog's tooth basically sheared it off. The cut itself was deep, but it healed pretty quickly. And initially I thought my thumb was sprained because I think I'd got it caught in the dog's collar. So I was kind of grabbing her like this, and the other dog snapped at me, the big one, right, which you've seen on camera. So he got hold of my hand, let go, of course, the minute he realized that he'd bit me, because he didn't really mean to bite me. The two dogs were fighting, and she's smaller than him, but she's far more dangerous than he is in terms of she gets into him pretty easily. So they don't fight very often, but when they do, it tends to be relatively, you know, bombastic, and you know, usually all I have to do is dump some water on them. But for some reason I wasn't thinking straight, so I shoved my hand in there, got this nice little puncture wound there, damaged the thumb, thought it was sprained, no big deal, healed pretty quickly, I felt fine, and then I realized as the swelling on the sprain went down that my range of motion on my thumb is severely impaired. So this is my good thumb, and I can do this. I cannot do that with this hand anymore. So anyway, I went and saw a hand surgeon because I was worried that ligament damage or something like that. And this is my dominant hand. I use this for painting. I use it for pretty much everything. If it's a fine motor skill, I use my left hand. If it's a sort of, if I'm using a hammer, I use my right hand. Yeah. So I guess I'm ambidextrous, but it tends to be, the break tends to be between fine motor skills and kind of blunt motor skills or force, right? So in any case, so this hand hasn't been doing too hot recently, and not that I hold figures with this hand, but my grip strength is down immensely. So gripping like this is fine, but gripping like this is almost impossible for me. This is really painful, right? So anyway, another thing I've noticed as I've gotten older is that my ability to hold things. So if you imagine I'm painting with my left hand, I'll hold a paintbrush like so, and then I used to be able to just pinch a base like this and hold it for ages. And so, you know, if I was painting something, I would just put them on their base like this, and then I would paint them on a base, and then that would be it, right? And at the end, I'd pop them off and base them up the way I want them in the end. But what I've found is, as I've gotten older, my grip strength isn't as good as it used to be, and I fatigue much more easily. But I suspect also when I was younger, it's probably happening as well. I just didn't notice it as much. But as you get older, you tend to notice these things. So I have this tendency these days that if I'm sitting for a very long period of time and I'm holding on like this, I will just, at some point, I will either over squeeze or something, or I'll drop it. And of course, there's nothing worse than dropping a nicely painted figure. But the other problem with this is that your fingers are quite close to the figure itself, so it's very difficult to get a good grip without obscuring the figure itself. Now if you're painting the top end, that's fine, but if you're painting towards the bottom, you now got to get some kind of silly holding it and pinching it like this, and that's not a great position to be in. So mindful of all of that, my neighbour Steve has a really nice set of table saws, and I bought this dowel rod ages ago, and this dowel, and he said, and I said, oh, do you mind if I use your saw, because I can cut them nice and level, which I did. So I've got these little dowels. They're I guess, what is that? That's like maybe about an inch diameter, maybe a little bit more. So anyway, I got this dowel, and then I thought, right, that'll work, and use them as a painting stick. So what I do is I pop the figure on top, glue them on. Usually with just some super glue, I tack them on, and I can pop them off pretty easily. I have used PVA in the past, but if you do that, you end up with this kind of ridiculous sort of like lip at the end, and then you've got to file it down, which is just extra work. So I use super glue because I've bought a big multi-pack, tack it on there, and then I can paint, and then when I'm done, I just pop him off and he's good to go. And this has been quite handy because I can grip the figure like this. I can also manipulate the dowel in any direction I want, and I've always got a large surface to hold on to, so slightly more stable. Works out great. So anyway, dowels in hand, I decided to paint up a couple of these Italians. So Ralph very kindly sent me a video that focused on the uniforms and showed off, kind of all the details and such, and then also some of his painting guides and everything like that. So thank you for sending that, Ralph. And then I decided to paint these up. So with this, I did a little bit of an experiment. I took the video that I got from Ralph, the pictures and everything, and I fed them into an AI, the Gemini AI, or was it Copilot? I can't remember which one it was. And I asked one of the AIs to analyze the pictures and then look at the color values from the illustrations, and then determine what the best matches were from the Vallejo model color range. The AI goes away, it crunches the numbers, and it tells you, okay, so the shade should be this color, the mid-tone should be this color, and the highlight should be this color, which I then followed. So what you have here are two different painting recipes. The one on the right, which has a slightly greenier tinge, slightly greenish tinge, is the Copilot result, and the one on the left is the one from Gemini. So Gemini, I didn't feed it pictures. I just said, if you were painting Adua campaign, Italians, Bersaglieri, how would you paint them with Vallejo model colors, and describe all the bits and bobs you do. And then the Copilot did the same thing, and the outcomes were very similar but slightly different, of course. I think the one on the left is slightly more tannish, kind of brown tone. I opted for a much more washed out, sun bleached look. I've seen pictures, some of the pictures, they were a bit more brown, a bit more khaki looking. I decided I really wanted a pale washed out look, to go for that sort of Africa sun thing. And I thought they came out quite nice, actually. I then also tried, and I don't know if you can see this, but on the face, on this chap here, I tried doing like a 5 o'clock shadow type thing. Anyway, so those are the figures. I thought for test figures they're not too bad. I'll probably base them off for Death in the Dark Continent, as Italian colonials, obviously. I know they're for the Boxer Rebellion, so they don't really have a ton of kit on them. There's no like water bottles, canteen, they don't have their their bedrolls or anything on them. They just have ammo pouches and weapons. But I don't really care, to be honest. They're perfectly fine figures. There doesn't seem to really be a great range in 28mm. I know Ralph has some Strategia e Tattica, Italians, and a few other bits and bobs. Ascari Miniatures do some Italian colonial types, and Bicorn do them as well. But most the ranges tend to be either more of the Jazz Age kind of Italo-Abyssinian War that's more famous. Well, I don't know if it's more famous, but certainly the one with the more modern version of the conflict. Whereas I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in the earlier conflict, to be honest, 1896, I think it is, Adwa. So anyway, so I painted them up as a kind of bit of a sideshow. They will need to be based. I'm not sure which one of these I prefer color-wise. If you have any ideas, let me know. If anybody is a keen student of Italian colonial history, tell me which one you think is a better fit. One thing I haven't finished yet, I said they were finished, but then I lied, I suppose. The helmet badges, I'm not quite sure what to do there. I'm thinking I might just put a dot of white and a bit of green, just maybe a red dot, just to create the impression of the sort of Italian coats of arms. But I need to kind of look at that really and figure out how I'm gonna do that in 28mm scale, because they are quite small figures, and I'm not sure if it's going to add a lot of value. I'm making myself go half blind trying to get them added in. So anyway, those are done. They just need to be based, and then their little front badges done. But I can actually base them and do the front badges. That's actually quite feasible. It's just generally I can't base them, multi-base them, and then get to various parts of them satisfactorily. Especially if they're base 3 to a base, which is what they will be. There's just not enough room. So I got those done, and then, as I mentioned, I've been kind of just loads of bits and pieces going through my hobby mountain over here. So I think I'll stop it there for a minute, and then what we'll do is a couple bits and pieces more I want to get through for this video. The one is on the topic of magazines, and I want to show something off there. And then the final piece will just be the stuff I've completed. So that'll be the kind of eye candy section at the end. Again, I will add chapters or whatever it is to this, so if you want to jump ahead, jump back, whatever, look at the pieces you care about and ignore the rest, you can do that. But let's move on to the bits I want to talk about, magazines. Alright folks, so I said I was going to do a little sort of section on magazines, and what I've got here is a real artifact of history. This is a almost 50-year-old magazine at this point. November 1976 Wargamer's Digest. Now I have a stack of these that were very kindly loaned to me by one of the chaps at the club, and really the reason I'm interested in them is I know recently there's been a lot of chatter online about magazines, about the value of wargaming magazines. What are they for? Have they become less and less useful over time? You know, like the general chat, like everyone says, oh, it's basically just a catalogue. And so I was curious if that's true, right? So really, how much have they changed over time? And then secondly, I think just to sort of this section of the video rather, is just also to kind of have a bit of a look at how things have changed and how they've stayed the same, right? So obviously 1976 is a very different time in the world. Sorry, I've got my little buddy here and she keeps pitter-pattering around. You'll probably hear her tapping around as she goes. So the reason that these magazines mean anything to me, I guess, is, and I'll start by showing that off first, is at the club we've played a few games. This is the issue that I remember us playing from September 1979. $2, you'll notice $2 price tag as opposed to 95 cents in 76, so inflation is very real even back then, right? Anyway, so we played this scenario, and this is one of the coolest things about this magazine in my mind, is it has this thing called battle stations, and it provides you with a problem, and then it gives you a sort of, in this scenario it's a US motorized battalion versus Panzer IVs, and they then give you on the right side here, hopefully you can see, I mean I don't want to zoom in too much because then we kind of lose the overall view, but there's a battle map that's gridded nicely so that you can lay out your table in a similar fashion, and then it gives you the order of battle on the right hand side. And what they'll do is they'll give you a scenario to play, and you'll notice it's just 2 pages, right? And then what you're supposed to do is go away and play the game, right? And then rather niftily, towards the back of the magazine, they have the solution, or not the solution, but the way it played out for them. So let me just find, there it is. They call it the solution, but you get the idea. So they played the game themselves, and then they'll tell you basically how it fought out for them, and kind of how to solve the tactical problem that they give the attacking force or the defending force, whoever it may be. So this is one of the reasons why I like these magazines, is that we played a few of these scenarios where we'd turn up. I think we're playing rapid fire. We'd turn up, we'd play the scenario, and then of course at the end of the evening, having fought the game ourselves, we then read the solution together. And it has a nice like there's a real practical usage to the magazine above and beyond it just being about information or reading interesting stuff, right? So that's how I kind of got to know about this magazine. And then I said to Gary one day, I said, hey, listen, do you mind if I borrow a few just to have a flick through and a read? So what I do now is I come of an evening when I'm not painting, you know, because painting is fun and all, but sometimes you need to take a break, you know. So sometimes when I do need a break, I just sit down here with a drink or whatever, cup of tea, something like that, and I flick through and read some articles. And it is in doing so that I came across this wonderful little nifty bit of information. So what I want to do is just flick through this one copy of the magazine, all right, just to give you kind of an insight into what this looked like. I don't know if you can even buy the back issues of this magazine anymore. I doubt it. Unfortunately, it's no longer going, but it's pretty good. But you can see here the minifigs catalog. So, you know, one of the big complaints these days is that everything's an advert. You know, you buy miniature war games and it's just whatever magazines, I forget what they're called now, but all the modern magazines are just nothing but catalogs, really. I think, if anything, it's probably more true back in the day, as we'll see as we go through this magazine. But then I think it was a totally different world. You know, you needed these magazines in order to buy things. There was no internet, right? You couldn't just go to minifigs.com and buy the figures you wanted. You'd have to, you know, you'd have to contact a PO box or whatever and send off a list of things you wanted with a check, most likely. Or if you wanted an illustrated catalog, you have to pay $2. You know, this idea that, you know, we have everything at our fingertips these days. So I sort of wonder if magazines have retained aspects of their function that are no longer necessary. In other words, we don't really need them to be product catalogs anymore, yeah, or advertising platforms to the same degree that they were back then. But you can see here there's Hinchcliffe as well is advertised, and you know, I mean, bless them, back in the day the figure sculpting quality has really come leaps and bounds, hasn't it? There's the opening sort of salvo by the editor. There's these lovely 15mm Napoleonettes, and you know, these are just absolutely stunning, fantastic little kind of adverts for all the various things. Here's an interesting thing that we don't generally see. I don't know if that's true anymore, but whatever. My point is, this article is all about organization, unit organization, and what happens when French units fight British units in the peninsula. And there's a lot of information in here. For instance, it tells you how the British battalions were broken down into companies, and they give you some recommended basing schema, which is useful, obviously. But again, thinking about these as a sort of distillation of research that people have done, because you know, back in the day, if you wanted to know how many companies were in a British line battalion, you would have to go to the library. Maybe you'd have to get a specific book and maybe order that book, and it's very difficult to get that information in a concise and quick manner. Nowadays you pump it into an AI and it'll tell you, right, because it's scraped all the information for you. So it gives you the French battalion breakdown. Again, notice the advertising is pretty thick in here. It's not, you know, this isn't by no means just a book of knowledge. There's the opposing tactics that they give you some tips as to, like, okay, if you're the French, how would you beat the English, right? How do the English beat the French? You know, so British forces and lines should remain under cover behind hills for as long as possible. They should deploy large numbers of light troops, at least equal to the French skirmishers, to help control and protect their position. So, you know, these are kind of tactical bits of advice that that I think are really cool. And it just, there's such a, I don't know how to say it. I mean, there must be a nostalgia factor, I guess, but obviously I didn't live through this age, so I can't really say it's nostalgia, but I sort of wish we had magazines like this, you know. Then this article caught my eye. This was brilliant. This is Skirmish Wargaming. I'm going to read a little section to you because I think it's just brilliant, especially in the context of what we call skirmish wargaming today, which I don't think is what they describe here, but let's have a quick read. So there's a picture there with some Norman knights engaged in exposed portion of a Saxon position in 25mm. And it says here, an uncommon form of tabletop combat gaining acceptance within the wargame community is skirmish wargaming. Many are unfamiliar with this type of combat situation because it began to receive recognition only a few years ago in the United Kingdom. Now, however, interest in skirmish wargaming is stirring in this country and offers the wargamer yet another means with which to while away the hours. But what is skirmish wargaming, and what are its mechanics, and how does one get started in this new type of battle gaming? The purpose of this following article will be to answer these three questions in order to assist the wargamer in discovering just what skirmish wargaming is all about. And it gives you some examples here in a section. It says, skirmish wargaming is by definition considered to be a small-scale combat, utilizing perhaps less than 20 miniatures per side, wherein each miniature represents one actual soldier rather than the usual 20 or so. Each turn of a skirmish wargame represents only a few seconds or less, hence players must not be concerned with grand tactics. Instead, players must be concerned with the individual responses of each combatant under his command. Each miniature must act and respond in a manner that a real man will act and respond as each second of combat passes. A skirmish wargame is based upon the performance of a few individual men rather than upon the performance of battalions, squadrons, and larger formations. Skirmish wargaming could perhaps be called individual combat or man-to-man combat because it represents individuals fighting each other. Sorry, mashing my words there. And it gives you some examples. The last rush of a company of Zulus upon a part of the perimeter at Rorke's Drift during the Zulu War. The legendary stand of a Titan-sized Viking upon Stamford Bridge in 1066. The gunfight at the OK Corral, Indian raids, duels between musketeers during the time of Louis XIII, light infantry skirmishing in the Napoleonic Wars, cavalry sword fights, and so on. Okay, so I'm not going to read the rest of the article, but what I found interesting about this is, I read the rest of the article obviously, that the conception of skirmish wargaming here is very different from what we would call skirmish wargaming these days. I think what's happened is and I've said this before, so I suppose you can tune your brain out at this point if you're not interested in hearing the discussion, but it's something that we've been talking about for a little while, which is, on the one hand, people will say that a game like Sharp Practice, for instance, is a skirmish game, or Sharp Practice 2, let's say. And that is true if it represents option 6 here, light infantry skirmishing in the Napoleonic Wars. But what happens in practice is that, you grab what you fancy off the shelf, so 8 Old Guard Grenadiers, that's a unit, which again strikes me as slightly odd in the context of skirmish wargaming, but whatever. And then you grab 5 Dragoons on their horses, and that's another unit, and then a small gun with its crew, and then maybe a few line infantrymen and a few officers to round out the selection. That is not, to my mind, that does not fit this definition of skirmish wargaming, right? It's just not a realistic, zoomed-in example of what you would likely have seen. I think if you were saying, like, okay, we're going to do the farmhouse at Hougoumont, you're going to have, maybe 20 or 30 figures aside fighting over a section. They're going to be relatively homogeneous forces in the sense that the British troops will all more or less be the same. The French troops will all more or less be the same. It's unlikely that they've just found a gun along the way and they've dragged it along. And so I feel like the definitions of things have begun to slide and undermine their own meaning, because we want to believe that skirmish wargaming is really a small unit type game. So in a sense, I guess a platoon-based wargame is in the purest form a skirmish wargame, because it's one man, one figure. Also, the units are like integrated real formations. The add-ons that we might find, so like let's say a mortar team strings along or an engineering party strings along, are reasonable and believable within the context of modern combined force armies. And that just doesn't really work with like Napoleonics, for instance. I don't think, anyway, myself. It just doesn't seem to. And what we've really done is we've taken a game that maybe should be battalion sized and shrunk it down to some kind of like high degree of abstraction, where the battalion, the 8-man unit or whatever, is behaving like a smaller unit than it actually is. I find it very strange. But anyway, that's interesting to me that skirmish wargaming was very much a new thing at the time. And I think the same concerns applied back then, which was that in order to actually get wargaming in a larger larger conflict, like say a battle of some sort, like Waterloo or whatever, would take years of purchases and painting and everything. Very difficult thing to achieve. Anyway, enough of that waffle. I've spoken enough about my thoughts on skirmish wargaming, and when I do play a skirmish wargame, I think I shall have to be very careful to define what I think a skirmish wargame is versus like a small battle game, which is a kind of really awkward definition to my mind, but I'll just leave that there. Here's another one. This is again, this is more informational. All right, it's actually taken from a magazine called Armor, and it gives you details on all the tanks and stuff. And again, if you think about, like, it gives you all the armament, the power, the suspension, all this kind of stuff that your sort of rivet counters would care about. This, or your tread heads, I guess. This is kind of something that we don't really need anymore in a magazine, right? Because this information is more easily available. You could probably buy a book about this armor if you wanted to, off Amazon with two clicks, So yeah, again, this is kind of a step back in time. They also had this really cool column called Innovations, Brainstorming for Progressive Wargaming, in which they would take a topic and they talk about like trying to come up with mechanics to model things accurately. In this case, it's to do with artillery fire, wargaming artillery. So that's very clever to my mind. Again, I think it's interesting that I don't know if this is true or not, but wargaming certainly felt like it was a bit more in flux at this point in time. And then there's a basic training. This is a basics of wargaming section. So this is about teaching people, how to do things, and so again, in the absence of the internet and fora and all those sorts of things, and the ability to simply just, pick someone's brains online, you would have to provide something a bit more accessible. Here's another thing I found which really made me smile. So this is a little like review section. They tell you a rule set or whatever, or a book, and then they give you the price and so a few details about it. And look what's here: Seekrieg Naval Rules, $9. And I'm going to read this. I think Ralph would appreciate this because it's one of his favorite rule sets. I'm assuming this is the very first edition, right? Brand new naval wargaming rules that update naval wargaming to include air operations as well as surface ships from 1895 to 1945. Includes air and submarine rules. The rulebook offers a 2-phase naval wargame. The search phase, which is a map game involving finding your opponent's fleet by sea and air search, and battle phase, which involves the actual clash of ships at sea. Complete rules for search operations, weather damage, battle operations for both 1/1200th scale and 1/2400th scale, which include ship movements, gunnery, damage effects, smoke, torpedoes, mines, air and carrier operations, as well as anti-aircraft and air-to-air. Rulebook 8 by 1.5 inch by 11, 26 pages, with a heavy stock cover. Special ship data book
covers every ship from 1895 to 1945 from all nations, carefully researched to provide complete data on each class of ship. 8.5 by 11 inches, again same form factor, 37 pages with a heavy stock cover. 18 special battle reference charts for quick check on action and results. That brought a smile to my face because I know Ralph is a huge fan of Sea Creek 5, and I know he did a really good section on his Wargames rules video about it. But yeah, just looking at these, you've got some of the classic old rules here. I think Tractics is one that people even today are still playing. But yeah, quite interesting. And there's probably Sword and Spear. I think we've got a new version of Sword and Spear that's out now. That's probably not written by the same people, but it's all there. And then this one here is quite interesting. It's quite a fun one. This is a battle set in 1860, so it's a fake battle. It would never have happened between the Russians and the Austrians. And the Battle of Lviv, or Lvov as it's put here, so it's a battle report, but in a fictional conflict, which, I think we often think of that as being a much more modern sort of conceit, this idea that we can do what-if scenarios or whatever. But I think there's always been a part of us as wargamers that have liked the sort of more, I wouldn't say fantastical elements, but the sort of made-up conflicts. And you'll notice here that just as you go through the book, it's just interspersed with advertising. That's not a problem, right? Like I said earlier, it makes sense given the world in which we lived prior to the internet. One of the interesting things to spot in here is these Scrooby figures, Jack Scrooby figures. Very interesting and of a certain style. I don't think they'd sell particularly well these days. But yeah, again, these lovely black and white photos. This is the best you're going to get in terms of seeing the figures. Some of them are actually pretty decent. Like I was looking at these Saxon Feared, these miniature figurines, minifigs, right? Norman Heavy Mace Man. I mean, these are pretty solid figures, even by today's standards, I think. Obviously superseded at this point, but not bad at all. One-to-one wargaming. This is just some photos from Knoxville Civil War battle in full scale. That was a reenactment. And, I think stuff like this, again, is useful because if you're painting your figures, you may want to say, well, what do people actually look like? And they give you some reenactment photos. Before YouTube, that would have been quite a valuable resource. More AFV specs, again, because it would be difficult to find this info back in the day. This is a fun section. What they do is they give you the ORBATs, or the organizational structures of things like a platoon or a battalion or whatever, and they explain it to you all, how many men would have been in it and so on. Again, thinking about, so it tells you here, for instance, Soviet mechanized regiment, the anti-tank gun battery is equipped with 6 85mm auxiliary propelled anti-tank guns, and it lists it all out for you. So again, in a world before the internet, this would have been absolutely worth its weight in gold. Then they do some little reviews of board games and such. Again, there's a degree of being able to purchase things via this not via the magazine, but the magazine acting as a catalog in the absence, I think, of the internet, right? So again, there's a trade-off we make there. We have to have this in order to communicate effectively about where you can buy bits and bobs. This is quite cool. This tells you obviously where all the clubs and stuff are. So the fun thing is, I look in here, I can see Durban Wargames Group, wargaming in various periods from Ancients to World War II. Contact Enzal, 1 Baden Road, Westville, Natal, 3630. So interesting thing is, Durban Wargames Group still exists, and it still meets in Westville, because I met one of the guys from that club, Anton, when I was at Warfare last year. So quite remarkable that these clubs have persisted for as long as they have. I mean, really quite remarkable. Another one that I'm aware of is, if you look in the Canada section here, you got Trumpeter Wargames Club, tabletops and board games, Napoleonic Medieval Ancients, ACW, Colonial, Fantasy, 7 Years War, etc. Meets every second Friday at 7:30 p.m. in Burnaby, suburb of Vancouver. And then they're actually doubled here. They've got their name twice. So obviously very important. But the funny thing is that club still meets till this day, and they just still meet on a Friday. I think last week was their meet, so that would have been the second Friday of August. So that doesn't seem to have shifted. their location has probably moved. They're at a community center, like a sports center type thing. I don't know what they call them in America or in Canada, but in England they'd be like a sports center type thing in Burnaby. So yeah, the club is still there. Quite remarkable, you know. I mean, this is what, 1976? Is that what I said at the start? Yeah, 76, November 76. I mean, quite remarkable. Yeah, so stuff that you don't really expect. And then, you know, more advertising here towards the back end. So I just wanted to share that with you. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, you know, I know we give magazines these days a lot of grief, you know, for being catalogs and so on, but I think there's always been an element of them being eye candy. I suppose the question is less, you know, is a core function of the magazine to be eye candy, or is it that in the modern day that function has basically been lost, in a similar way that probably listing out where clubs meet is no longer required. You would probably just refer people to a website that's dynamically updated. And then I wonder if all of this is true, what's the point of wargaming magazines these days? And I don't mean that facetiously. I genuinely mean, like, what's the point? I know that there's been this tendency that was demonstrated by the Yorkshire Gamer of magazines to have a theme. I don't know if that's necessarily the right direction to take wargaming magazines in, or if indeed wargaming magazines are even relevant anymore. I like the idea of curated content that's more, you know, has a certain expectation from the reader in terms of quality. I think that has value. You know, the fact that there's an editor, there's the fact that it isn't just any old rubbish. On the one hand, the internet has been great for, like, democratizing, you know, materials, in that anyone can publish anything they want. But on the other hand, you only have to look at the self-published section on Amazon to realize that, unfortunately, it's just opened the floodgates for rubbish. So there's a degree to which I'm concerned that, you know, it's not always quality stuff that's making it through the gate. But anyway, so I'll leave it at that, and we'll get and look at some figures that I finished painting now. All right, so we'll start with some of the things that I finished painting in the last while. This is a Confederate gun, pair of Confederate guns actually, and they came out quite okay actually. There's a little bit of fluff there caught on one of them. Let me just fish that out. You know how they always just, the sharp edges of things tend to just accrue dust and bits and bobs. Anyway, so these are Essex figures. These are these are the only artillery figures that I got as part of an army pack that I bought from them in the early 2000s. So I've got the guns done now. I have I think I might have one or two limbers for them, and I've got boatloads of cavalry for some ridiculous reason. I don't know why I have that much cavalry, but I just have the 2 command packs, 2 commands left to do for the Confederate stuff, and then that's the end of that army pack. And then I've got the cavalry lot, and I think what I'll probably end up doing is divvying up the cavalry into 2 parts, one for the Union and one for the Confederates, because I don't think I'll ever need that much cavalry. But anyway, as usual, based for Fire and Fury. I just like the basing schema. I do think the artillery bases are just too tight. As you can see, you don't have a lot of real estate to play with, and I utilized Ralph's video on how to place crew relative to the position of the guns, but you just don't have a lot of wiggle room with these base sizes. Kind of wish it had been slightly larger, but anyway, it is what it is. So you end up in a kind of strange position here where I've got to offset the gun a little bit to fit the crew next to it, the guy handling the wheel. Anyway, got that done pretty quickly. 15mm stuff is always a joy to paint for me because it's pretty quick. I don't have to spend a ton of time on it, and I think it comes out looking pretty good. You can also be relatively heavy-handed with the highlights and make them quite stark. I think it actually works at the smaller scales. Yeah, so happy with the way that turned out. Alright, so this is actually the second time I've tried to film these chaps, excuse me, I've got slight hiccups. I got to the editing software and then realized that the first attempt had corrupted on the memory stick, so this is attempt number 2. What you have here is a sort of 2 bases of American War of Independence Continental Infantry. I have, excuse me, I've done my best to, Hector's up and about. I've done my best to mimic one of the uniforms I found in the Perry pamphlet that comes with the plastics, based upon the sort of round hat and the brown coat. Supposedly some sort of Pennsylvania battalion, so I just mimicked that. The figures are 28mm battle honours, and they've painted up quite nicely. They're very monopose in real terms. The feathers I varied the tones of the brown, sorry, and then the feathers I've kind of done a variety of blues just to break things up again a bit. But the fact that everyone has exactly the same feather is a little bit silly, really. Anyway, I got these cheap a while back, and as is my wont, I just simply... What is it? He's telling me a story here. And as is my wont, I just basically grabbed them off the shelf and decided that it was time to get some of these done. So I grabbed 6, got them done in about 2 days. Not spent a lot of time on them. I just slapped the paint on and did a couple of highlights here and there. These figures are not my favourite. They're not as fine as a Perry figure. They've got quite deep details, which is a good thing. But again, I'm not enamoured of them, so I thought, you know, just get them done. So I've done them 3 to a base, as you can see, and although normally I go for 60 by 60 bases for the American War of Independence, I've decided to go for slightly more broken down 30 by 60 bases, so that I can, you know, string them out a bit, put them in loose order if I want to. Just, you know, I just fancied a bit of a change, really. But they do stack up to 60 by 60 if needed, depending on the game that I'm playing, or if it's like a skirmishy type game, or a small battle game, or more of a large battle game, or a large skirmish game, heaven forfend. But anyway, the idea is I wanted some flexibility without individually basing them. I've opted for a slightly more interesting basing style with some flowers and some grasses, just to break up the monotony of the brown coats. And also I think I'll just stick with that for North America, just to try to create some visual interest, you know, within the bases. I think if you do your bases nicely, it can actually cover for a lot of the lack of effort on the figure itself. But anyway, so there's that. This is a set of 6 Boers, one of whom you've seen before, the one on the left here. I got these done again, as I've explained before. I just grabbed wherever I fancy. There were a few primed, undercoated, base coated, whatever you want to call it, Boers on the shelf that just were, you know, sitting there, and I thought, fancy a little bit of that. So these 5 here I grabbed off the shelf and painted up. The principle that I've used here is I've tried to kind of retain an irregular look for these commandos, in order to achieve that without kind of going absolutely mad. I limited my palette, so I grabbed a series of colors. So I think, for instance, like this looks like a saddle brown or a cavalry brown, maybe some kind of like green, a sort of grey color, blue, French mirage blue, I think. Anyway, I took a very limited palette of maybe 5 or 6 colors, and then what I would do is I would like use this mirage blue for this guy's hat, and then maybe I'd use it for the guy at the back's trousers, then maybe I'd use it for this guy's jacket up here, maybe another guy's waistcoat. and then I would use a different color, like green. Here I use green for the guy's jacket, you see, and then like there it's on his trousers. So I've kind of rotated through the colors without going too wild. So the principle is, I guess, that the there will be kind of a unified look in that the palette doesn't stray too wildly, but it also speeds up the painting process because I'm not constantly trying to be clever, right? So if I have 5 figures and I've got like 5 or 6 colors that I just rotate through, maybe one guy gets the hat, one guy gets the shoes, one guy gets the Sam Brown belt, move on to the next color, coats, you know, maybe one coat is blue, then the trousers blue, then the waistcoat's blue, then the hat band's blue. You get the idea, right? So just rotate through, and I'll just do that on rotation. I think they've come out alright. I'm doing them 2 to a base, in line with Death in the Dark Continent. The principle is that in the end there will be 2 cavalry for every 2 men on foot, so it'll be a 1-to-1 ratio there. And then I'll have some horse holder stands. Basing wise, I've gone for a slightly more arid, dry look. This is for everything I'm doing for my Southern African figures. So you know, these guys will be in the end probably fighting against various tribal enemies such as the Matabele, various Basutu, Pedi, Tswana, Swazi, Zulu, you know, Xhosa potentially peoples, and then of course there could also be some fighting the British, of course, and then even some what ifs such as sort of like you know, some Namibian adventures where they fight Schutztruppen or something like that. So there's a lot of like opportunity there, but I just wanted to do the bases slightly different, so I went for a slightly more arid kind of look. Although I have added splashes of color here and there with some flowers and some grasses just to break up the monotony. This little bush is a particular favorite of mine. I added it because I think it adds a high degree of like visual interest, but it also kind of the sort of savannas, I guess, of the Highveld in South Africa has these little thorn bushes that grow, and you know, depending on time of year, stuff gets green and it goes brown again. So I just thought, the little bush looked quite nice, so I wanted to use some clump foliage, and I did. So yeah, it's come out okay. I mean, again, I haven't invested, a ton of effort into these figures. The Black Tree Design 28mm figures, they're actually quite nice. It's just the problem with Black Tree is actually buying them, right? So I don't know if I'll ever get any more of them, but I have got a bag full to paint, so I'll get those done at some point. As I say, like when the mood takes me, I just crack on and get some done, and then move on to the next thing. And then over time, because this is not a priority at the moment, I will just sort of churn my way through. But yeah, I was quite happy with how these came out in the end. I'm not quite sure if the lighting is doing them any justice. The viewfinder on this camera sort of shows them quite dark, and I can't tell if it's the viewfinder that's just not very that's not showing them off, or if it's the lighting is just not very good. But I've got a light. You can't see this obviously, but there's a light like maybe just out of view here, just above the figures, and I'm desperately trying to whack them with as much light as I can. But I think in lieu of a photo box, I don't think a light box, I'm not really going to get any much better light on them. But there it is. So thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you all are doing well, and catch you on the next one. Thanks. Take care.